You can't get romantic on a subway line. Conductor don't like it. Says you're wasting your time. What could it mean? What could getting romantic on a subway train possibly be alluding to? Like many Van Halen tracks composed and recorded during the David Lee Roth era, Everybody Wants Some throws intriguing images at the listener, but ultimately comes up short in the comprehensibility department. But that's the charm of DLR era Van Halen. To quote producer Ted Templeman, Dave's lyrical contributions were an essential but unappreciated part of what made Van Halen so great. Dave had a different fix on things. It's as if he viewed the world through his own demented kaleidoscope. David Lee Roth's cockeyed kaleidoscope is on full display on Everybody Wants Some. Featured on Van Halen's third studio album, Women and Children First, Everybody Wants Some showcases Van Halen at their most intense. Indeed, if you listen closely to the track, you'll hear how overdriven and distorted Dave's vocals are, almost as if to underscore some sort of tension within the band. Well, if you ask me, I think Dave is calling attention to a certain pressure, a pressure that will threaten Van Halen's very existence. Now, exactly 2 years ago, Dgtl made its world debut with an inaugural video that revealed how legendary Van Halen tracks, including Little Dreamer, DOA, Unchained, and even Jump, are not just lyrical nonsense, but actual meaningful sentiments that detail David Lee Roth's philosophies and real-life experiences. So, seeing as it's our birthday and all, what better time to revisit the topic of David Lee Roth and his intriguingly opaque lyrics. In this video, we're going to take a speculative deep dive into Everybody Wants Some, with the goal of unpacking the song's mysterious meaning. In this second anniversary edition of Dgtl Graffiti, Everybody Wants Some, the lyrics of David Lee Roth, Part 2.
Rose Parade. No movie memory would be complete without the inimitable Walt Disney, celebrating 50 years of fantastic fantasy.
Pasadena, California, home to the world-famous Rose Bowl Stadium and its companion event, the Rose Parade. The city's placid reputation is evident in the title of the 1964 Jan and Dean novelty song, The Little Old Lady from Pasadena. Scenic and orderly, Pasadena is the absolute last place anyone would expect a marauding heavy metal band to come from. Yet it's here that the musical brontosaurus known as Van Halen will hatch. So it's the early 1970s, and Pasadena teenager David Lee Roth fantasizes of being a singer. But there's a problem. By all accounts, Dave has no natural singing ability whatsoever. One day, he witnesses a performance by local legends, the Van Halen brothers, and it's immediately apparent to Dave that these are the guys who can make his dreams of stardom come true. But how will a guy who can't sing ever have a hope in hell of joining a band featuring virtuoso musicians? Well, despite the fact that he can't sing, Dave has a reputation around Pasadena for being the cool guy, similar to the character Arthur the Fonzarelli in the hit 70s TV series Happy Days. Dave is so cool, he's not only on good terms with whites, but also with the black kids, the Latino kids, the dope dealers. Many of the girls want to date him. All the guys want to hang out with him. If this was a TV show, it would be called Everybody Loves Dave. Possessing a swagger that compensates for his lack of singing skill, Dave employs his formidable confidence, charisma, and stick-to-itiveness to convince the Van Halen brothers to invite him into their band, Mammoth. And almost immediately, he goes to work transforming the group into a lean and brutally efficient musical enterprise. A natural businessman, Dave cozies up to LA club owners, getting the band booked booked in venues on Hollywood's iconic Sunset Strip and beyond. To facilitate these bookings, Dave convinces the Van Halen brothers to stop playing note-for-note recreations of 6-minute boogie songs in exchange for playing short, danceable top 40 tunes, including tracks by R&B and funk acts. Now, you might think that a man so thin on singing ability would bow his head and defer to the virtuosic Van Halen brothers, but Dave will leverage his charm and wide-ranging musical tastes to transform Mammoth into an all-encompassing band that combines the brute punch of heavy metal, the dangerousness of proto-punk, the soulfulness of Delta blues, the staginess of vaudeville, and even the razzle-dazzle aesthetics of glam rock. He persuades the no-nonsense working-class Van Halen brothers to style their hair and wear glittery stage fashions. Why? It's even Dave's idea to name the band Van Halen. In defiance of the Van Halen brothers' more serious musical tastes, Dave cultivates a fun, hard-partying image that will come to define classic Van Halen. But these creative triumphs don't come easy for Dave. During their ascent to local royalty on the LA rock scene, Dave and the Van Halen brothers frequently butt heads, resulting in explosive disputes and arguments. As Dave himself said, "There was conflict from day one. Massive egos. Egos big enough to fill entire football stadiums. It was furious and it was constant." Business management, music direction, image consulting, lyric writing, it all falls on the shoulders of David Lee Roth, the guy who initially couldn't even sing when he joined Van Halen. So now, fast forward to 1980. Van Halen is world famous. The band's first 2 albums both sell millions of copies right out of the stable. The foursome is headlining arenas all over the world, and rock publications are running splashy stories about the group and its exploits. You might even say that the band was a juggernaut, a train, if you will. And if we metaphorically view Van Halen as a train, we could say that David Lee Roth, the guy who was pulling triple duty as the band's music, image, and business consultants, was Van Halen's conductor. That is, the guy largely coordinating things. Except the word train doesn't sing. You can't get romantic on a train, just sounds, well, lame. So what does Dave do? He uses the word subway line to convey the point he's trying to get across. So, with multi-platinum record sales and sold-out arena tours worldwide, conductor Dave should be happy, right? Well, no. It's 1979 and Van Halen is set to enter the studio to record their 3rd album, but something is roiling the air within the band, and that something is romance. Bassist Michael Anthony is engaged to his high school sweetheart, and drummer Alex Van Halen has a steady girlfriend. And Eddie? Well, he's just months away from meeting his future wife, Valerie Bertinelli. Writing about the situation in his 1998 autobiography, Crazy from the Heat, Dave describes the difference between himself and his Van Halen bandmates. There was a lot of resentment coming from opposite ends of the sphere. I was have gun will travel. They were family oriented. God bless. True love, relationships with long-term commitment, domestic bliss. I'd never experienced this. So I was coming from a whole different versification. Which is to say that all this lovey-dovey stuff within Van Halen is a nightmare for Dave. He's a proud bachelor who takes the phrase sex, drugs, and rock and roll seriously, yet he's joined a band of devoted family men. He senses that if his bandmates continue with all this girlfriend stuff, it won't be long before the Van Halen tour bus is packed with wives and wailing babies, not groupies and curvaceous autograph seekers. As Valerie Bertinelli writes in her 2022 autobiography, enough already. After Ed and I became involved, all of a sudden there was this rule that there were no girlfriends and no wives allowed on the road. I got along great with Al and Mike. It was someone else. I don't know why he didn't like me. But what are you gonna do? It doesn't take a genius to guess that the someone else Bertinelli is referring to is David Lee Roth. I think all the evidence presented here strongly suggests that the opening verse of Everybody Wants Some is conductor Dave voicing his displeasure over all the dating going on with his bandmates. It's Dave saying, after years of duking it out in the clubs, we finally hit pay dirt and you guys want to settle down? We've got to remember, Dave was really skeptical of romance and marriage. As he recounted to Joe Rogan, the singer was unceremoniously kicked out of the Roth household by his mother during his teens. Given such a harsh family experience, it's somewhat understandable that Dave would look askance of marriage and kids. Judging from the opening lyrics of Everybody Wants Some, Dave believed his commitment-minded bandmates were, quote, wasting their time with all the courtship, that they were getting lost in the jet stream, as Dave sings later in the song. Now, to support my theory, I direct you to the title of the album from which the song is taken. The term Women and Children First is a reference to an unofficial maritime code of conduct. The code states that in the event of a calamity, say a shipwreck like the Titanic, men are chivalrously expected to sacrifice their own lives for women and children. It's plausible that David Lee Roth repurposed this phrase to make a statement about Van Halen's future. To Dave's way of thinking, Eddie, Alex, and Michael were putting their plans of marriage and family ahead of those of the band. In theory, they were putting women and children first, and because of that, it's likely Dave feared Van Halen's music was in jeopardy of losing much of its dangerous edge. And, for better or worse, Van Halen's music did get softer, prettier, and more domesticated after Dave was jettisoned from the band.
All of Sam's lyrics contain love.
Yes.
Okay, why can't this be love? And I ain't talking about love.
Further evidence of intra-band turmoil on Women and Children First is the album's cover, which features Van Halen emulating the famous photo by Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal, depicting the planting of the American flag at Iwo Jima during World War II. Even more proof is suggested on the track Loss of Control, one of the most intense songs in the Van Halen catalog. Loss of Control begins with Dave sounding out an unintelligible SOS on a megaphone, while Eddie Van Halen picks out an urgent Morse code-like riff. As the song explodes into a hyperspeed blues, Dave addresses an unspecified adversary. Baby, I'm checking out. I think you ought to know. I'm only wasting time. I think I better go. But it's the single line following this couplet that infers Dave is addressing someone or someones who don't fight fair. You ain't too civilized. Could it be that the persons Dave contends ain't too civilized are Eddie and Alex Van Halen? Before Women and Children First, much of Dave's creative input was accepted, but Loss of Control suggests that the Van Halen brothers were becoming increasingly more vocal in their opposition to Dave's ideas. Note how Dave sings that he's checking out and that he thinks he better go. Also, notice how, just like on Everybody Wants Some, Dave employs the phrase, wasting time. It's possible that Dave was beginning to fantasize about leaving Van Halen because the disputes and the arguments were reaching a fever pitch, and he may have feared that he was losing control of the helm. That would certainly seem to be the case. It's a fact that Eddie Van Halen all but seized total control of Fair Warning, the album that followed Women and Children First. From its title to its Iwo Jima-like cover photo to songs like Everybody Wants Some and Loss of Control, Women and Children First appears to be the work of a band in the opening throes of an internal war.
I like the way the line runs up the back of their stockings.
For those of you who might doubt this Everybody Wants Some theory, I think there's actual video evidence that Dave viewed himself as the boss of Van Halen, and that proof exists in the form of the band's 1981 music video, Oh Pretty Woman. Conceived by Dave himself, the video shows the members of Van Halen portrayed as characters that reflect their personalities. Thus, Michael Anthony is cast as a sword-brandishing samurai warrior, a commentary on his broad-shouldered build and sumo-sized talent. The Van Halen brothers are depicted as badass Wild West gunslingers, a commentary on their quick-draw musical virtuosity. And Dave, he portrays himself as a 1700s naval commander. This is Dave telling the world that he pretty much is captain of the good ship Van Halen. A similar message is suggested on the music video for Hot for Teacher, where child actors portraying Eddie, Alex, and Michael hop into a car commandeered by an adult Roth who's dressed like the leader of some rock and roll biker gang. Naval captain, train conductor, gang leader. In essence, they're all the same thing. These songs and videos tell us about Dave's image of himself as the engineer of Van Halen. Okay, so now fast forward to 2012. The biggest story in rock is Van Halen's A Different Kind of Truth tour, a hotly anticipated jaunt that finds the Van Halen brothers reuniting with Dave. Just prior to the tour, the band drops its first studio album of new material with Diamond Dave in nearly 30 years. When the album finally arrives, it shows that Dave has lost none of his sly, under-the-radar sense of humor. He signals his return as the band's conductor on the album's cover, which features a vintage photo of a train.
You fucking sneaky bastard!
So, what effect do you think the power struggle within Van Halen had on the band's music? And if you were in Van Halen during this period, would you have sided with Party Hardy Dave or with the more conservative Van Halen brothers? Comment below.